I'm Sharon Cameron from Nashville, Tennessee.
We are the Dusenberry River Library Teen Advisory Board, and my name is Vanya.
My name is Miriam.
My name's Keiko.
I'm Natia.
I'm Brooke.
My name is Nina.
Hi, guys.
Okay, well, just to start us off.
Okay.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, Star Wars. I didn't even have to think about that one.
Okay, so were you in any way inspired by space, and why did you choose that setting?
Oh, that's a really interesting question because that's probably the part of the setting that I really didn't consciously choose or not write at first. I was really, when I first start writing, I tend to look at setting first. And I always start with setting, even sometimes before premise, sometimes before characters. And what I knew I wanted out of the forgetting was a story that was about people who were set apart in a different place, people who had lost their memories, who were having to deal with constructing a society around this problem of not having memories, of not having a history. And that was sort of where I started exploring. And so having the whole idea of setting them apart with space was just sort of this natural extension, but probably not what I at first started out to write. It just really worked for the story. Yeah.
So compared to your other books, which were more historical, how was the writing process? Was this more difficult?
In some ways, this writing process was more difficult because even if I'm constructing a fantasy world, I want that world to feel as real as possible. So this time I had to construct a planet that worked. Not only did I have to construct a society that worked and characters that work and that make sense, even if I don't write about all the things, I want to know how they get their food and how, I want to know how the economy is working. I want to know how all of these areas of the world are working so that it feels believable. But this time I had to know, like, how much oxygen is there and what is the gravity like and just how far away are we from a sun and how are we rotating, and I mean, how much is it going to be like Earth, how much is it going to be different from Earth, because it does need to be a planet where people can live. So actually it was a lot more complicated than I had thought it was going to be when I started, because it wasn't just a society I was building or an extension of our own society. It was really taking an entire biosphere, and making that make sense and work. So that part took actually quite a bit of research to make sure I was getting it right. So, yeah.
On page 92, there's a sentence I want to read. Who could write truth? The real truth is someone else who's going to read it. And why do you think it's important to use fiction stories to express a deeper truth?
Because I think that's the way we can accept it. I think from the beginning of time, probably, human beings have been using story to really get at the deeper truths that we want to explore. So it's so much easier to listen to a story than it is to listen to someone lecture you on what the truth ought to be. You can, when you have a story, you can pull that truth out for yourself. I never really actually try to write a story that has an agenda, not specifically, because I really want my readers to take this situation and their own minds and their own experiences and pull out what they need from that story. And so for me, I that's what I'm looking for everyone to do is pull that own truth out. But I think that we can find those things so much easier. We can wrap our heads around those things so much more easily if it's inside a pretend other person's experience. If it's inside a pretend world, we can put ourselves in that situation in a safe way. It's a non-threatening way to put yourself in a situation and decide what you might do with that situation. And I just think that's the beauty of story. That's why it's important. That's why we have it. It's not just that it's thrilling and wonderful and exciting to escape into those worlds, but it allows us to explore those things that are so much harder to hear when they're just the cold, hard truth.
Both Lilia and Nadia are protective of their families, but in very different ways. What in their history shaped this?
Repeat the last part of your question.
What in their history formed these differences?
What in their own
between them?
personal
Yeah.
history formed that? Oh, well, for this book in particular, I think for Lilia, it's a lot about not having or only having a certain amount of her history in her own mind, because she doesn't have, she's lost her childhood. She's lost the early part of her childhood. She cannot remember those things. And so, I think that one of the things I wanted to explore in the book is how people would react so differently to that in so many different ways. One of her reactions is to protect one family member while rejecting the other, because she doesn't have those past experiences with Nadia to rely on. She doesn't understand her because she doesn't have her experiences to help her understand her as a child. And so I think these are just very human reactions of the way we feel when we don't understand, and we're trying to understand, and we're trying to maybe sometimes justify the way we feel, even if it's a bad thing to feel. So those were some of the things I was exploring when I was looking at the two very different ways that those characters are dealing with their family and with a mother that is not well. And I think even if you take away the entire situation of the forgetting and the entire situation of not having memories, having lost your history and your experiences, dealing with a mother that's mentally ill is just hard, no matter what. And two siblings are not going to handle that the same way, especially two siblings that have very different personalities, like Nadia and Lilia do.
What would you do the day before the forgetting, knowing that you would not remember it later?
Oh, wow. That's such a hard question. If it was me, if I was in that situation and I knew there was no way to escape it, that was what was going to happen, those books aren't long enough. Those books aren't big enough. I would be writing everything down. I wouldn't stop writing. I would not want to lose what I had. And everything you write is something that you're not going to lose. So I think I would just write all night, is probably what I would do, so I could retain as much as possible if I wasn't figuring out a way to stop it. If I thought I could stop it, then that might be different.
So, given the opportunity to write your truth, would you personally want to know who you are, or would you write a different history for yourself?
Oh, I think that I would definitely want to know who I am, who I was. I'm an enormous history buff, which is part of what brought me to the idea and the premise of this book. I've done a lot of genealogical research into my family, and I really love I love the whole research part. It's kind of like being Nancy Drew. You get to uncover the mysteries and the secrets, and you get to go, poke around in all the old books and the courthouse basements, I love all of that stuff. I think that is really, really cool. And what has amazed me, though, in all of that research is how much of my own family's story has been forgotten. And it's been forgotten because it was either never told or never written. And so when that person was gone, what was in their mind was lost. And there's so much of our history that has been lost. So I would want to write down what was real. I've spent a lot of time researching, wishing that I had some ancestors who had written down what was real for me to make it easier. So I would definitely write down what was real. But I think people would probably choose very differently. I don't think everybody would choose the same. Yeah.
So, one of the messages we got out of this book was that not knowing can hurt you just as much as knowing. Which seems worse to you?
Knowing or knowing. Oh gosh, it probably depends on what the truth is, doesn't it? I think I don't know if there's one good answer for that, because I do think it depends on the truth. There were characters in the book. The character of Jonathan for instance, who needed to heal, and his healing was going to come easier and quicker without him knowing everything and without his memories. And there were people who were unhappy with their life. The character of Imogen and Ishin, who decided to make a new start and make that fresh start. I don't know if I would choose that, but maybe I'm not dealing with the memories that they were. Yeah.
So, as you just mentioned, you were a genealogist, and we were wondering how that played a part in writing the story.
Well, it definitely played a huge part because of all of the things that in my family that I found out had been forgotten. Particularly, I had an experience. This happened 3 or 4 years ago, where I was looking into one side of my family, and I discovered that my 4 times great grandmother was a slave, and I didn't know that. It was something that had not gotten talked about in my family, and we ended up doing DNA. We got all of that. It's right there. There it is. And I feel so connected to a piece of our history that I never knew I was connected to. I feel blood connected to those things because that is part of my history. That was my great grandmother, and she was from Senegal. And I'm so glad that I know that. And so a lot of the idea of the book, a lot of that formed when we found this out about our family, this piece of history that was almost lost. It was almost gone. There was one person left who had some pieces to that puzzle. And they have since passed away. So it was almost gone. And if I had never known that, I just feel like I would not be as rich of a person. And so it made me think about the whole idea of what if we didn't have any of our history? How would that affect us? Are we less of a person for not knowing that? Are we still who we are? Or are we completely shaped by those things? How much are we shaped by the past? How much are we shaped by just our own choices and not the past at all? So it was really that experience, I think, that gave rise to the whole premise of losing your personal identity and your history.
There was a passage in the book in which Grace stated that someone should gather all the books to have a collected truth. Mm-hmm. Granted that the books hold each individual's truth, do you think that it is possible to have an unbiased account of history?
I don't think it's actually possible, because I think the more accounts you have of history, the more you can meet in the middle and find what's real. But all of the history we have is biased. A lot of the history we have is from the perspective of the conqueror. So for instance, if you're going back to read about the ancient world, you're going to be reading a lot of Roman accounts of that. Well, the Romans wanted to look good. They wanted to look good for their emperors, so you have to be really careful. They're spinning, and I think that we continue to do that right now. Our news is spun. What we see on TV, everything is spun to an opinion. And I think that we can't help but do that. I try to be an objective person, but who can really step outside of their own perspective? So I think each one of those books is going to be one person's biased opinion, whether they mean for it to be that way or not. It's going to be their biased opinion of what the world is like. And maybe by putting them all together, you can meet in the middle and get a better picture of what's real. But I think a lot of our history is very, very skewed. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in the forgetting, obviously, memories play a huge role in the story.
Absolutely.
So we were wondering what memories shaped your life.
Oh, wow. One of the things I did when this book first came out is I asked for readers to send me the one memory that they would never want to lose which is an impossible question. But, what is a memory that you would never, ever want to lose? And it was really interesting, the answers that I got, because they were incredibly different. Sometimes they were really profound memories, like, the day I met my husband of 30 years, or it would be, sometimes it would be just a small thing, like the first time I tasted ice cream. Like, it could be absolutely anything that was important to everyone. And so I don't know. I thought about the answer myself, because I was asking the question. I thought about that answer for myself, and I had lots of them. There was no way to choose one. But I will say that one that stood out to me was the first time I went to Scotland. I had a really incredible connection to that land and that place. Like, I went there and I just felt like my feet sank into the ground, and weirdly I felt like I was at home. And it spurred a lot of ideas for me about how much of our memories can get passed down through our DNA, through our ancestors' experiences and that kind of thing. And there's some science behind that too, where they're able to pass down anxieties and experiences that they actually are chemically changing DNA. And so that whole experience, on one hand, showed me something about myself, I think, but it also really spurred a lot of ideas. And it's just also a beautiful memory because I loved it so much and I was so happy. So that's a memory I don't ever want to lose. It's like that first feel, smell, like it was very important to me.
So we were all also curious if there are people in your life that have inspired any of your characters in The Forgetting?
Oh gosh, I really try not to do that because I don't want anyone to hate me. I want to keep all my family and friends, and I don't want them to hate me. But on the other hand, I'm sure there must be, because when I'm writing, I mean, I'm the sum of my experiences, right? I'm the sum of my memories and the people I've known. I'm sure that all of that has to be contributing to my characters. But I've never done it deliberately because I'm afraid they'll see. They'll find me out.
So were there also any subjects that you would never want to write about?
Wow, I don't know if I would limit myself like that. I'm a big believer in passion and being really, really passionate about a certain thing. Like Scotland would be one of those things. History would be one of those things for me. These ideas that I've written about, memory. I'm a huge believer in taking that enthusiasm that is really random and weird and probably not necessarily interesting to anyone else, and taking that and pouring that into my work, because I believe that it's almost a magical process that happens, that when I pour that out, that other people catch it. It's like fire. It's like flame to flame. Like they catch the spark of that for me. And I kind of had this revelation that I think that's what I've been doing all these years when I was reading. This is a second career for me. I was a musician for a long time before I ever turned to writing. And I realized that all those years that I was a reader, though, I have been catching other people's passions. So I really want to participate in that process. Like I want that process to be what is going on all over the world, like in everything. And I'm not actually talking about writing. I'm talking about art or music, or whether you want to run, a business. I think that is the thing that I want to write about. And so I don't ever know what that's going to be next, So I would never want to limit myself and say, I would never write about this or that, because who knows? My husband says it gives me a condition called the crazy eyes. It's like, you've got the crazy eyes. And I know what that means. You are about to spend the next 8 hours doing that or talking about that, So I would never want to limit myself and say I wouldn't write about something, because who knows? Who knows what I'll do?
Unfortunately, mental illness is still not fully openly talked about in our society. So, why was it important for you in particular to include this as a part of Nadia's mother's story?
I think that because of the situation of the story, with forgetting again and again, and losing your memories again and again, particularly losing your emotional connections. And even if you have a book that says this is your child, you don't have the feelings that go with this is your child. Because you've forgotten those. They're cut off. So these relationships have to be reestablished and reestablished. And I really feel like it's just a natural progression that this would unbalance your mind, maybe. That this would be a very, very difficult thing for some people to deal with. So I felt like that dealing with some forms of mental illness, especially with Nadia's mother, where she is having trouble understanding what is memory and what isn't, because she has that little bit of memory that is creeping in for her. I think that dealing with some mental issues would be a natural occurrence. We are so dependent in our minds on the solid truth of these things that are around us. It's very disorienting to lose them. So I think it's just, it wasn't like I had an agenda to deal with that, but I felt that it was just a natural progression of the story, that this would be a huge problem.
Okay. The end of the book is a cliffhanger, as we all know. What can you tell us about the next part of the story? Because we know it's a series.
Well, it's not exactly a series, I wouldn't say. So there is a companion book coming to The Forgetting. It's coming in October. It's called The Knowing. It is set in the same world, but many hundreds of years later. And actually, you could read these books in either order. So it's not time dependent to read The Forgetting first. You could read The Knowing first if you wanted to. But it actually is funny that you asked the mental illness question first, because in The Knowing, we're actually now dealing with a progression of this problem to where now we have a society of people who actually cannot forget anything. So it's impossible to forget an experience. It's impossible to stop feeling the emotion of that experience. If you fall in love, you can't unfall in love, even if it's with the wrong person, even if they don't love you back. You can't forgive because you can't stop. You can't stop feeling. Your memories never fade. And so mental illness is a huge part of that book, because our minds actually, I think, would have a harder time dealing with that than they would with actually being erased. So that is just a little tidbit of The Knowing, but that's coming in October. But you really can read them separately. You can read them independently. But you will get you'll get some clues about what happened next for Nadia and Gray.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really
This was
appreciate
wonderful.
your
You guys had
time.
great questions. You made me think hard.